Hi, welcome to Psych 101 with Dr. Elizabeth. Have you been wondering why the coronavirus outbreak has been affecting you so strongly with regard to anxiety, feeling just on edge, kind of hypervigilant, tightly wound? Why you're snapping at people around you, having trouble just making day to day decisions and functioning, and um, why so much has become so difficult in a short amount of time. I want to explain that in this video relating the coronavirus outbreak and everything that we're doing in response to that, um, and relating that to trauma and how trauma affects our brains. Trauma is a category of anxiety. When we think about post traumatic stress disorder, that is a disorder within the anxiety category of disorders. And so there's a certain way that anxiety affects the brain and the body, particularly when we look at it through the lens of trauma. And so I want to explain what might be going on for you, for people around you right now through the lens of trauma. When your brain perceives a threat, the part of your brain that goes into active um, when your brain perceives a threat in the environment, the part of your brain that goes into action is your limbic system. That means that a lot of your brain's resources, even down to blood flow and oxygen, goes to your limbic system. I call that the downstairs brain because it's the part of you that acts on instinct. The limbic system, when it activates, puts you into that fight or flight response. And you may have heard of fight or flight. There are some other trauma responses as well. When you're in that situation of an environmental threat, there's actually fight or flight or freeze, and also fawn. Those two responses, the last two might not be as familiar to you, but we sometimes freeze, and you can think about a deer in the headlights. Freeze, continue to assess what's going on in the environment, where's the threat, and what should I do? We sometimes freeze. And then fawn is another trauma response that's less familiar, but it has the idea of looking at how do I get the resources that I need? How do I appeal to a person that might be in authority in order to get what I need to be safe? So that idea of fawning means appealing. How do I act in a way that will cause that person to care for me and help me to be safe? So let's talk about what happens when that limbic system is kicked off, especially in a freeze response. Sometimes we go into fight mode where our body reacts strongly. We feel our heart rate increase. We feel increased oxygen to our muscles. That looks like an adrenaline rush. But it also blocks blood flow up into the thinking, rational part of our brain where we're reasoning through things. We're just kind of running on instinct. What do I need to do to fight off this threat? And then flight is a similar body response physically, but it's preparing you to run and escape and get away from the threat. Freeze, like I said earlier, is more of that deer in the headlights response where you're frozen, you're not taking action, but you're continuing to assess. And I think that's where a lot of us find ourselves right now. If you're noticing an increase in anxiety, if you're noticing more frequent feelings of panic or triggers and onset of panic attacks, if you have a history of trauma, this can trigger that limbic system in the same way and bring up past memories of trauma because of just the physiological response in your brain saying, hey, I remember feeling this way. This feels familiar. What's the threat? So what does that mean for you, being in that freeze mode, if that's what's happening? So a lot of us in the current situation with the coronavirus outbreak, we're tuned into the news. We're tuned into social media. We are on high alert for information that's going to help us assess the threat. This happens when we go outside of the house for a lot of us. If you're going to the grocery store, you might feel like you're on high alert and looking for what you need to do to be cautious. Make sure that, all of the things they're telling us, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer, wipe things down, don't touch your face. That's causing you to be on high alert and very watchful. And so when that happens and you're kind of stuck in this high vigilance state, this is taking a lot of resources from your body, a lot of physical resources, a lot of mental resources, and it's exhausting. So not only the trauma response itself, where you might feel elevated anxiety, but also the state of heightened arousal. And by that, I just mean everything that's heightened in terms of your awareness, your acuity, scanning your environment, scanning the news, um, and looking to assess the threat and protect yourself from it, is all wrapped up in that anxiety response, very closely related to what we go through with a trauma. Um, and so, what do you do to cope with that? What are some tips that I would have for you in terms of what to do about that? So, if you notice that you're stuck in hypervigilance, that watchfulness, um, one thing I want to really encourage you is to limit your access to the news, limit your access to social media. I would encourage you to think about the question, how will this information impact my decision making? Am I looking for information so that I can make a decision? Is it really going to change what I'm doing? If that answer is no, for example, if you're already staying at home, you're already social distancing, and receiving new information is not likely to change that, then you don't really need that new information. And so it's reasonable to limit your access to the news and what you're seeing on social media. Um, and when you limit your access to the news, you're limiting the news and that media cycle, their access to you and your emotions and your thoughts. So think of that as a two-way gate, that when you limit your access to input, you're also limiting um, how that input can access your emotions and trigger you. So we want to close that gate as much as you need to in order to be okay. So I've encouraged clients to pick one time of day when they're going to access the news and check in and find out what's going on, and then turn it off. So that might be once in the evening, and then turn it off, and find ways throughout the day to occupy yourself and not be accessing TV, internet, radio, um, whatever it is that is bringing you the news about current updates. There's also a type of update that is particularly traumatizing, and that's reading firsthand accounts of people who have been sick with coronavirus, people who have recovered, people who have a loved one who's going through an illness, and providers and first responders who are treating people with the illness. Now, they are seeking to put out information that's meant to be either helpful for you to know how to prepare, for you to be able to anticipate what you might expect, or really to convey the seriousness of the warnings, that you need to be taking this seriously and isolating yourself. However, when you read those firsthand accounts, that can be vicariously traumatizing to you. When you read what it's like for somebody else to go through something, some of the same neurons are lit up in your brain as if you were going through it yourself. And so it can traumatize you. It can create an anxiety response that is very powerful. So it is reasonable to limit reading those firsthand accounts and not open yourself up to the potential for that trauma. You know yourself, whether that might be a likelihood for you. So I really encourage you to limit those firsthand accounts. And when you do access the news, to catch up on what's happening with recommendations and the current spread, then do that in a controlled way where you are deciding and you are being the gatekeeper of how much information you're getting, what you're going to do with that information, and then when you are done receiving that information, how are you going to transition back into a normal routine. So I've encouraged, when I've had clients talking to me about how anxious the news makes them and yet they feel like they need to know what's going on, I say, okay, when you decide that you're going to grab that update from the internet, plan ahead of time what you're going to do afterward to take care of yourself. So access the news, get the information that you need, and then decide, what music am I going to listen to? Am I going to make myself a cup of tea, curl up with a book, listen to a podcast on a totally different topic? Something that will help your brain to transition back out of that exposure to the news and to that information. So think about caring for yourself and how you're going to transition and not remain stuck in an anxious state or a hypervigilant state. We want to really limit and have you take charge of what information has access to you, as well as what you're accessing. That it works both ways, and to think about it that way. Also, if you find yourself walking around in that hypervigilant state, know that your brain is trying to help you. Your brain is scanning the environment constantly for threat. It's not healthy or helpful for that to happen in a very sustained way, day in and day out. So you need to be able to take breaks from that hypervigilant, high anxiety state. So I want to give you a couple of quick ways that you can do that. One is focused breathing. Your anxiety response, when I talk about your limbic system, the way that that affects your body is it increases your heart rate, it causes changes in your breathing, it causes changes in your digestion. That's why a lot of us are walking around with stomach aches. It feels like our stomach is in knots, nausea, going to the bathroom a lot. There's a very real connection there down through your nervous system from your brain to each of those major body systems. So yes, anxiety affects you in really physical ways. Now, the one way that we are designed to have kind of a trap door or a way that we can get in there and impact our nervous system response is through our breathing. You cannot think your heart rate slower, and you cannot think your digestion to be more normal if your stomach is in knots. Can't really do that, but we can consciously change our breathing. And so the way to do that is to do some counted breathing. You want to focus on inhaling as deeply as you can, holding that briefly, and then really emphasizing your exhale. So there's a way to do this where you inhale to a count of 5, and then slowly exhale to a count of 5. The next time you're going to inhale to a count of 5 again, but exhale to a count of 6. Then again, breathe in to a count of 5, out to a count of 7. And we're going to keep lengthening 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on the exhale. It only takes a couple of minutes to do, but it triggers a relaxation response. It calms down your limbic system and moves you over into a parasympathetic nervous system response, triggering relaxation. And so that has a powerful impact on your sense of relaxation. It changes your brain chemistry and your body chemistry in a powerful way to do that. So we're going to breathe into a count of 5, and then out to a count of 5. Into a count of 5. Out to a count of 6. In. Out. In. Out to a count of 8. Last one, in. And out to a count of 9. And that's a nervous system reset for you to breathe in that way. Another tip that I would give you is to use cold temperature to your advantage. Cold temperature also downregulates the nervous system and triggers a relaxation response. So whether that's a cold drink, washing your hands in cold water, splashing some cold water on your face, putting a cool cloth on the back of your neck, all of those things can use the power of cold temperature to calm your nervous system and help you with that reset as well. You also want to think about maintaining pleasurable activities that help you get lost in normalcy, lost in some enjoyment temporarily, that releases positive neurotransmitters, positive hormones in your body, allow you a break from the stress hormones that flood your body when you're in that anxious, hypervigilant state. So those are some ways that, first of all, to explain why anxiety is heightened right now. It's your brain's way of trying to protect you, to assess the threat and help you make decisions about what action to take. Again, that's not helpful to be in for a sustained amount of time, so we want to use some tools to downregulate You want to use breathing, cold temperature, enjoyable activities, anchor yourself in a sense of routine. Set a time that you're going to wake up in the morning and a time that you're going to go to bed at night. Get up, get dressed, make your bed, get something to eat. Do things that help you have a sense of routine and a sense of normalcy. It will actually send a message back to your brain that says things are okay here, things are not out of control. There are things that I can control, and I'm doing those. Um, so there's a lot more that we can touch on as well. I want to invite you to share any questions or comments that you have about what's going on with you with anxiety, how to cope, how to deal with this idea that it's triggering trauma through that hypervigilance, and also vicarious trauma by reading the news and reading firsthand accounts. This is a way for me to share information with you and help you take charge of your well-being and your coping during this time. So feel free to drop me a line. I would love to get back to you in the form of another video, answering and fielding some of those questions and comments. So that's it for now. Join me next time on Psych 101.